My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 31 years old, and until this year, I thought I'd finally built a peaceful life, one where I didn't have to fight every day to be respected. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a modest two-story house with my son, Ethan, who's 7, curious and kind-hearted, the kind of kid who still picks flowers for his teacher and apologizes even when something isn't his fault. I was a single mom for most of Ethan's life. His father, Derek, left before our son could even say his name. He was one of those men who swore he wasn't ready but somehow found the strength to move across the country and marry someone else 6 months later. So it was just me and Ethan, me working long hours as a real estate assistant, him adjusting to school and life with just one parent. We were okay. Not perfect, but okay. And then my mom remarried. When she told me she was dating a man named Richard Hale, I honestly didn't care. I just wanted her to be happy. My mom, Lydia, had been alone for years, a quiet, soft-spoken woman who never really lived for herself. But Richard was different. He was confident, generous, and successful, the kind of man who looked like he'd walked out of a Forbes article. He ran multiple companies, had houses in 3 states, and yet, when he looked at my mom, there was something real in his eyes. At first, I was skeptical, but over time, he proved he wasn't just another rich man looking for a trophy wife. He treated Ethan like his own grandson. On weekends, he'd drive an hour just to take him fishing or to surprise him with books instead of toys. He'd sit on the porch with my mom, laughing, sometimes even helping me with bills when I refused to ask. But I never wanted to be that woman, the one who used someone else's wealth as her identity. I worked hard for everything I had, and I wanted Ethan to grow up the same way. Still, Richard would tell me, "Rachel, being proud is good, but don't let pride make people think they can walk over you." At the time, I didn't realize how much those words would mean. Ethan went to Oak Ridge Elementary, a private school on the nicer side of town. It wasn't the fanciest school, but it had great teachers and a community feel. I'd saved up for years to get him in there. Every lunch I skipped, every late night working extra hours, it all went to his tuition. Then came the incident, the one that changed everything. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when I got a call from the school secretary. Her voice was calm, but clipped. "Ms. Moore, there's been a situation involving your son. We'd like you to come down to the school immediately." My heart dropped. My first thought was that Ethan had been hurt. I grabbed my keys and sped over, my stomach in knots. When I arrived, Ethan was sitting outside the principal's office with red eyes and his backpack on the floor. He looked up at me and whispered, "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong." Inside the office sat Principal Karen Whitmore, a tall woman in her late 40s with perfect posture and a permanent frown that looked carved into her face. She motioned for me to sit. "Ms. Moore," she began, "Ethan was involved in an altercation with another student, Logan Peterson. There was pushing and some inappropriate language." I turned to Ethan, shocked. "Ethan, is that true?" He shook his head quickly. He called me poor mom. He said I didn't belong here. I just told him to stop. Then he pushed me first. Principal Whitmore sighed like she'd heard this all before. Unfortunately, that's not what the Petersons are saying. And given that Ethan has had some behavioral notes in the past. "What behavioral notes?" I interrupted. She looked through her file like she was looking for evidence to justify her tone. "He's had instances of talking back, emotional outbursts, and now physical aggression." I felt my jaw tighten. "He's 7, I said quietly. "He's 7 years old." But what she said next floored me. "We've decided that until you, Ms. Moore, come forward to apologize to the Peterson family and to our staff for the disruption caused by your son, Ethan will be temporarily suspended from attending classes." I blinked, thinking I misheard. Apologize? Me? What for? She folded her hands neatly. For the lack of accountability. For setting an example that has, unfortunately, created tension within the school environment. We run a values-based institution. Humility and cooperation matter here. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it, like she was trying to put me in my place. Like I should be grateful my son even attended their school. When I refused, her expression hardened. Then Ethan will remain suspended until further notice. Ethan's small hand reached for mine, trembling. I could feel him holding back tears. I wanted to scream, to flip that desk over, but instead, I stood up slowly, my voice shaking with anger. "You're punishing my son because he stood up for himself," I said. "And you're punishing me because I don't fit into your little country club bubble. But fine. If that's the way it is, we'll find another school." As I left, I could hear her saying something about parents knowing their place. That night, Ethan cried himself to sleep. I sat in the kitchen with my mom, trying to hold myself together. Then Richard walked in. He looked at my face, then at Ethan's empty plate. "What happened?" I told him everything. The insult, the principal's arrogance, the demand for an apology. He didn't raise his voice. He just nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. "So they banned a child because his mother wouldn't bow her head." "Yes," I whispered. He poured himself a glass of water, his tone calm but laced with steel. "Then I think it's time they learn who your family really is." I didn't know what he meant at first, but by the next morning I would. The next morning felt heavy. You know those mornings when the air itself feels judgmental, too still, too quiet, like it's waiting for something bad to happen again? That was me, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the email from Oak Ridge Elementary confirming Ethan's suspension pending a parental apology. He sat across from me, swinging his little legs under the chair, eating cereal he wasn't really touching. He looked smaller than usual, like the confidence I'd spent years helping him build had been ripped out overnight. "Mom," he said finally, "am I a bad kid?" My chest tightened. "No, honey, you're the best kid. You just stood up for yourself, and that's not wrong." He frowned, spoon resting in his bowl. "Then why does my teacher say I have to be sorry?" I swallowed hard. Because I wanted to say, some adults only apologize downward, never upward. Because people like Principal Whitmore think manners are a privilege for those with money. But I couldn't say that to a 7-year-old. I just reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't. Not for this." My mom came in from the porch, her robe loosely tied, eyes tired from another sleepless night. "Rachel," she said softly, "Richard's been on the phone since 6 this morning. I think he's making calls about the school." I looked up. "He's what?" Before she could answer, Richard appeared, already dressed in a navy suit and holding his tablet. He had that calm, deliberate energy, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing and how every word he said would land. "Morning," he greeted us. "Ethan, you doing okay, champ?" Ethan nodded quietly, though his voice didn't follow. Richard crouched beside him, meeting his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong, you hear me? Sometimes grown-ups forget that having money doesn't make them better people." Ethan blinked at him, trying to understand, and nodded again. Then Richard stood and looked at me. I called in a favor or two. I frowned. "Richard, I don't want you to cause a scene." "Oh, I'm not," he interrupted. "I'm going to have a conversation. Quietly." "Richard," I hesitated. "You don't have to do this." He smiled faintly. "No, Rachel. They made it necessary." I didn't know what favor or two meant until later that afternoon when I started getting calls. First, from a teacher I barely knew. "Rachel, I just wanted you to know that I think the situation with Ethan was handled unfairly." Then another parent. "Hey, did something happen at Oak Ridge? There's talk about the principal being under review." I had no idea what was going on until Richard texted me. "Meeting scheduled. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. principal's office." I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. "Oh God," I muttered. The next morning, we pulled up to Oak Ridge together, me in my usual jeans and cardigan, him stepping out of a sleek black Tesla like he owned the building. Ethan was in the back seat, clutching his backpack nervously. When we walked inside, the secretary's fake smile faltered the second she saw Richard. Her tone shifted so fast it was almost comical. "Good morning, mister," she started. "Hail," he said simply, giving her a polite nod. "We have a meeting with Principal Whitmore." Her voice went up an octave. "Of course, sir. I'll let her know you've arrived right away." The sound of whispered conversations carried down the hallway. I could feel people watching. For once, not in judgment but curiosity. Recognition. The kind of recognition that only comes when someone powerful walks into a room. When we stepped into Whitmore's office, she stood immediately. Her usual stern composure looked cracked, her smile forced. "Mr. Hale," she greeted, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise," he said, shaking it with just enough pressure to remind her who she was talking to. Then he gestured toward me and Ethan. "This is my stepdaughter, Rachel Moore. And her son, Ethan." Her face twitched slightly, but she nodded. "Yes, of course. We've had some issues to resolve." Richard sat down, crossing one leg neatly over the other. "Yes, I've been made aware. You've decided to suspend my grandson pending an apology from his mother. I'd like to understand your reasoning." Her tone hardened, defensive. "Mr. Hale, Oak Ridge holds its students and their families to high standards of conduct. We promote humility, cooperation, and respect. Unfortunately, Ms. Moore's behavior during our last meeting." "My behavior?" I interrupted before I could stop myself. "You told me my son couldn't come back until I apologized for something he didn't do." Whitmore's lips tightened. "Ms. Moore, please." Richard raised a hand gently, silencing her. "I'm very familiar with humility and respect, Principal Whitmore. But what I see here isn't about values. It's about bias." Her posture stiffened. "I beg your pardon?" "Let's be honest," he continued. "You have donors, parents, and families who contribute large amounts to this school, correct?" She hesitated. "Of course. We rely on community support." "And in that community," Richard said calmly, "a single mother working in real estate doesn't exactly rank high, does she?" Her silence said everything. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know who sits on your board of trustees?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Because I do," he said. "And after speaking with two of them this morning, they seemed very interested in reviewing how disciplinary actions are handled at Oak Ridge." The color drained from her face. He continued, voice even. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to reinstate Ethan immediately. You're going to issue an apology, not to me and not to Rachel, but to him. Because he deserves to feel safe and respected here." Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Hale, I don't think." He smiled, polite but cold. "I wasn't asking." The silence that followed was deafening. She finally nodded stiffly. Of course. I'll make sure it's handled appropriately." Richard stood. "Good. And I'd suggest you also review the behavior of any staff or students who think wealth determines worth. Because I'll be checking back." When we walked out, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. Ethan squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. "Mom," he whispered, "is everything okay now?" I looked down at him, tears pricking my eyes. "Yeah, buddy. I think it's going to be." Outside, Richard put his sunglasses on and said simply, "That's what standing your ground looks like. Sometimes people only learn when the ground shakes beneath them." For the rest of the day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The PTA chat was on fire. Some parents were thrilled someone had finally stood up to Whitmore. Others were furious. The Petersons, the other kid's family, tried to spin it like I'd brought in a corporate bulldozer to intimidate the school. But the truth? I didn't ask Richard to fight for me. He just refused to let people bully his family. By evening, the school's website had quietly updated. Oak Ridge Elementary reaffirms its commitment to fairness and inclusivity among all students. That night, Ethan helped me make dinner. He hummed while stirring the pasta, like the world had gone back to normal. But I couldn't shake what Richard had said earlier, that people only learn when the ground shakes beneath them. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A few days later, Ethan returned to school. Whitmore greeted us at the door with a smile so strained it could have snapped in half. She bent down and said, "Welcome back, Ethan. We're so glad to have you." He nodded shyly and went inside. I stayed for a moment, meeting her eyes. "I hope we understand each other now," I said quietly. Her fake smile didn't falter. "Perfectly." But I could tell she hated me for it. And I wasn't wrong. Within a week, small things started happening. Ethan's artwork went missing. He stopped getting picked for group projects. One day, he came home crying again because a teacher told him some families don't fit in everywhere. That's when I realized power can scare people, but it can't change who they are inside. It wasn't enough that she'd been put in her place. She wanted to remind me that no matter what, I never belong in her world. But what she didn't know was that this time, I wasn't going to back down quietly. The following week, something inside me shifted. You know that feeling when the storm's over, but you can still smell the rain, like the air itself is warning you that peace is temporary? That's how it felt every morning I dropped Ethan off at school. He'd walk through those tall glass doors with his little backpack bouncing, and I'd watch him glance over his shoulder every few steps, just to make sure I was still there. He didn't say it out loud, but I could see it in his face. He didn't trust the place anymore. And honestly, neither did I. At first, it was little things. His daily progress notes, which had always been filled with gold stars and great participation, suddenly became shorter, colder. Needs improvement. Easily distracted. Then came the subtle isolation. During pickup one afternoon, I noticed Ethan standing alone by the fence, his classmates running past him, laughing and chasing each other. His teacher, Miss Porter, pretended not to see him. I asked him later that night, "Hey, bud, didn't you play tag with your friends today?" He shrugged, fiddling with his fork. "They don't really play with me anymore." My chest tightened. "Why not?" He hesitated. "'Cause Miss Porter said my family caused trouble for the school. I think they don't want to get in trouble too." I froze. Trouble for the school. That phrase stayed with me long after he went to bed. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV, without seeing anything. It was like I could hear Principal Whitmore's voice in my head, cold and clipped. "We hold our families to high standards of conduct." This wasn't about Ethan anymore. This was about control. The next morning, I decided to show up early, earlier than usual. I parked across the street from the school, sipping my coffee and watching. Kids streamed through the gates, but Ethan's class lined up near the entrance for recess. Ms. Porter stood nearby, talking to another teacher. I could see Ethan sitting on the bench, his lunch untouched beside him. Then I saw it. Ms. Porter glanced toward him, shook her head, and whispered something to the other teacher, who immediately laughed. That was it. I got out of my car, crossed the street, and walked straight to the front office. The secretary's face stiffened when she saw me. "Oh, Ms. Moore. Is there a problem?" "Yeah," I said flatly. "There is." She shifted uncomfortably. "Principal Whitmore isn't available at the moment." "That's fine," I said. "I'll wait." And I did. For 47 minutes. Long enough for the receptionist to start sweating and pretending to look busy. When Whitmore finally walked out of her office, she looked startled, but only for a second. Then that fake smile snapped back into place. "Ms. Moore, what brings you in today?" "I want to know why my son is being treated differently." Her expression didn't change. "I'm not sure I understand." I stepped closer. "His teacher told other students that our family caused trouble for the school. He's being excluded. His work is disappearing. His grades are slipping for no reason. I want answers." Whitmore sighed, the way people do when they want to look patient while being dismissive. "Rachel, sometimes children misinterpret things. Ethan has been under stress lately. Perhaps he's feeling sensitive." "Don't." I cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare imply my son is imagining this." Her eyes flickered, a brief flash of irritation. "I understand you're upset, but you should be careful with accusations like that. Our teachers are respected professionals." "Respected?" I said bitterly. "By who? The donors? The ones you protect more than the students?" Her face tightened. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Ms. Moore." I stared at her. "You really think you can bully me into silence, don't you?" "Good day, Ms. Moore," she said, already turning toward her office. That night, I sat at my dining table, staring at my laptop, feeling that old helplessness creeping back. I'd been here before, years ago, with Ethan's father. The gaslighting, the power imbalance, the way they made you question your own reality. But this time was different. This time, I had backup. I called Richard. He picked up on the second ring. "Rachel." I think they're retaliating, I said quietly. Not to my face, but through Ethan. I could hear the shift in his voice, the calm gone, replaced by quiet anger. Tell me everything. I did. Every detail, every whispered comment, every look that didn't feel right. He listened without interrupting. Then, in that deliberate way of his, he said, "If they want to play power games, we'll give them one they can't win." The next few days were oddly calm. Almost too calm. Ethan said Miss Porter was being nice again, but something about it felt rehearsed. I tried to relax, but my instincts wouldn't let me. Then one afternoon, I got an email from another parent, a woman named Jessica, whose daughter was in the same class. It read, "Hi Rachel, I just wanted to reach out privately. I don't know all the details, but some parents have been saying awful things about you, that your family used money to threaten the school, that you embarrassed the PTA. I thought you should know." I sat back in my chair, blood boiling. It wasn't just retaliation anymore. It was a smear campaign. They couldn't humiliate me in the office, so they were doing it in whispers behind doors, in text threads, at bake sales. But what they didn't realize was that I was done playing defense. That night, I printed out every email, every note from the teacher, every message from parents. I even compiled a few voice memos I'd started recording whenever I sensed tension at pickup. Then I called Richard again. He answered, voice calm as always. "You've been busy." "I'm tired of being their villain," I said. "I want to expose them." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're sure?" "Completely." "Then let's make sure we do it right." The next week, Richard set up a meeting, not with Whitmore this time, but with the school board. The same people she'd been so afraid of. He didn't tell me what he said to get it, but by Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a formal invite. "The Board of Trustees would like to hear your concerns regarding Oak Ridge Elementary's conduct and leadership." When I walked into that meeting room, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From years of being talked down to, dismissed, underestimated. The board members sat around a polished wooden table. Whitmore was there too, looking like she'd swallowed glass. One of the board members, a woman named Linda Collins, smiled politely. "Ms. Moore, thank you for coming. We understand there have been concerns." I took a deep breath. Yes. Concerns that my son has been discriminated against and targeted after I refused to apologize for something he didn't do. That a principal has allowed personal bias and retaliation to replace fairness and professionalism. Whitmore started to speak, but Linda raised a hand. "You'll have your turn." I slid a folder across the table, neatly organized, labeled, documented. These are copies of communication from teachers and parents. I've highlighted where my son's work went missing, where he was left out of activities, and where false stories about me began spreading. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers. Then I added, "I don't have a legal team. I don't have a PR department. I just have a child who deserves to be treated like every other kid here." Linda nodded slowly, glancing at Richard. "Mr. Hale, I understand you're connected to a few of our community partners?" He smiled faintly. "That's right. And I'd like to ensure my future contributions go toward institutions that value integrity over ego." Whitmore paled. The meeting lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the board thanked us for bringing these issues to their attention. 2 days later, a message went out to all parents. Effective immediately, Principal Karen Whitmore will be taking an indefinite leave of absence. Ethan didn't understand the politics of it. He just ran into my arms that day after school and said, "Mom, guess what? We have a new principal. Everyone says she's really nice." I laughed, tears slipping down my face. "That's great, baby." But even as I smiled, something inside me ached. Because beneath the victory, there was still the sting of how cruel people could be, how quick they were to destroy what they didn't understand. That night, when the house was quiet, I stood by the window and watched the city lights blur in the distance. Richard came up beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You did good," he said. I shook my head. "You did all the heavy lifting." He smiled softly. "No. You stood up when most people would have given in. That's the heavy lifting." I sipped my coffee, exhaling slowly. I just wanted to protect Ethan. And you did, he said. But you also showed him what strength looks like. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But part of me knew this story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes when you stand up to power, it doesn't vanish. It waits, quietly, for another chance to strike back. And I had a feeling that chance was coming. For a while, everything seemed normal again. Ethan started smiling in the mornings. He'd hum while brushing his teeth, tell me about new games his friends played at recess, and for the first time in months, he came home with a gold star taped to his shirt. I remember that night perfectly. We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating takeout, and he looked up at me, cheeks full of noodles, and said, "Mom, school's fun again." Just 4 little words, but they hit me hard. Because that was all I'd wanted, for him to feel safe again. But peace has a way of lulling you into comfort right before it breaks you again. It started with a Facebook post. A local parenting group I was part of, Moms of Oak Ridge, had always been my space for advice, playdates, the occasional venting about homework. One Friday morning, while scrolling through my feed, I saw a post that stopped me cold. Some parents think money can buy their kids' innocence. Must be nice having a billionaire step in to clean up your mess. No names, but I didn't need them. The comment section was filled with laughing emojis, whispers about that one mom who couldn't apologize, and enough gossip to make my stomach turn. I slammed the laptop shut and just sat there. It was happening again, only this time, it wasn't just the school walls. It was the entire community. I didn't cry right away. I'd learned how to hold it in, how to let the anger sit still long enough to understand it. Later that night, when Ethan was asleep, I reopened the post. Someone had added a new comment. Didn't expect it from her, honestly. She seemed so sweet when we had coffee. I froze. I'd only had coffee with one mom, Laura Benson. Laura had been one of the few parents who stuck by me when everything happened. She'd checked in, brought cookies for Ethan, even told me she thought the school handled everything terribly. I picked up my phone and called her. She didn't answer. The next morning, at drop-off, I saw her near the parking lot, talking to another parent. When she noticed me, her smile faltered for just a second before she waved. "Hey, Rachel," she called. "How are you?" I walked up to her slowly. "I could ask you the same." She blinked, pretending not to understand. "What do you mean?" "You made a post about me." Her face flushed.
What?
"No, I didn't." "Don't lie, Laura." Her jaw tightened, and then her voice dropped, quieter. "People have a right to know what really happened. You embarrassed the school, Rachel. You could have just apologized." I stared at her. Apologized? For what? For defending my son. She looked away. "It's not that simple. You went too far bringing your stepfather into it. Now, everyone thinks Oak Ridge takes bribes." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me being right or wrong. It was about me not staying in my place. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "You really think standing up for my kid was too far?" She crossed her arms, defensive. "Some of us worked hard to get into that school. We don't have billionaire backup to fix things when we screw up." Her words cut sharper than I expected. Because underneath all the anger, there was jealousy, resentment dressed up as moral outrage. I didn't say another word. I just turned and walked away. But the damage was done. Over the next few days, whispers spread faster than wildfire. Parents stopped making eye contact at pickup. Invitations that used to show up in Ethan's backpack mysteriously stopped. Even at the grocery store, I could feel the looks, the subtle turning of heads, the half-smiles that didn't reach the eyes. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, I called Richard again. He answered instantly. "You sound tired." I laughed bitterly. "Is it that obvious?" He didn't reply right away. Then he said softly, "They're still talking, aren't they?"
Yeah.
But it's not just them. A parent, Laura, someone I trusted, turned on me. She said I went too far bringing you in. Richard sighed. "People like that don't hate you, Rachel. They hate what you remind them of. That power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice." His words were comforting, but still, part of me felt hollow. I thought I did everything right this time, I whispered. I thought if I fought fair, things would go back to normal. Sometimes, he said gently, doing the right thing doesn't make you popular. It just makes you stronger. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, the humiliation, the whispers, the betrayal. And beneath all that pain, a thought began to grow. If people were so determined to see me as the villain, maybe it was time I stopped trying to be the saint. The next week, I started documenting again. But this time, not for the board. For myself. Screenshots of posts. Names of parents who spread lies. I even reached out to a friend who worked as a journalist, someone I'd gone to college with, who wrote for a regional news outlet. I told her everything. Rachel, she said over the phone, her voice half shocked, half intrigued, if I run this story, it's going to blow up. I know, I said quietly. That's the point. She hesitated. You sure you want her name attached? Yes, I said firmly. They already dragged it through the mud. I might as well make it mean something. But before she could publish, something unexpected happened. I got a call from the new principal, Ms. Donovan. She sounded nervous, like she wasn't used to this kind of confrontation. Ms. Moore, she said, I just wanted to let you know that there's been some unrest among parents. Some of them have requested that Ethan be placed in another class. My blood went cold. Because of me? She hesitated. They say it's for the comfort of other students. I took a slow breath. You realize that's discrimination, right? I'm trying to handle this delicately, she said quickly. But I wanted you to hear it from me first. When the call ended, I just sat there numb. I had fought so hard for Ethan's place in that school, for his dignity, and now they were trying to isolate him again. That night, Richard came over. When I opened the door, he took one look at me and said, What happened? They want to move Ethan, I whispered. Different class. Because the parents can't stand me. He exhaled slowly. Then it's time we stop reacting and start leading. He spent the next hour making phone calls, calm, strategic, efficient. The way powerful people handle things. I watched him, half in awe, half in disbelief, as he dismantled the problem piece by piece. The next morning, I woke up to a storm, but this time, it wasn't against me. Local news stations were buzzing about concerns over parental bullying and social class discrimination at Oak Ridge Elementary. The article didn't mention me by name, but the details were unmistakable. By noon, parents were panicking. Laura deleted her post. The Moms of Oak Ridge group went private. And the school released a statement about promoting unity and respect within the community. Richard had done it, without threats, without shouting, just quiet, precise influence. When I picked Ethan up that afternoon, the air felt different. Parents avoided my gaze, not out of superiority this time, but guilt. Ethan ran up to me, grinning. Mom, guess what? Ms. Donovan said our class is going on a field trip to the Science Museum. I smiled and hugged him tight. That's amazing, sweetheart. As we walked to the car, I spotted Laura standing by the gate. She looked nervous, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in a long time, I realized revenge didn't always mean screaming or breaking someone down. Sometimes it meant walking past them with your head held high while they drowned in the silence they created. That night, as I tucked Ethan in, he said softly, Mom, you look happy today. I smiled. I am, baby. I really am. After he fell asleep, I went out to the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. The air was cold, crisp, and quiet. Richard called. It's over, he said. Yeah, I whispered. But it still hurts, you know? I know, he said gently. But pain fades. Dignity doesn't. And he was right. Because in that stillness, I finally understood. I hadn't just fought for Ethan's right to belong. I'd fought for my own. I'll never forget the moment I saw that email. The subject line read, Official apology required for reinstatement. It was like someone had pressed rewind on my entire week of progress, dragging me back into that same loop of humiliation and helpless anger. The email was from the school principal, Miss Coleman. Her tone was polished, proper, and passive-aggressive, the kind that almost sounds polite, but every word drips with control. She said, "After careful consideration, the board has decided that Mason may return to school provided that his mother issues a formal apology for the inappropriate conduct displayed during her meeting with school staff." It didn't even make sense. I hadn't shouted, cursed, or threatened anyone. I had simply refused to accept the unfair treatment of my child. And yet there it was, the demand. They wanted me to crawl back, to bow my head and apologize for standing up for my son. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the screen, my coffee going cold beside me. My reflection in the black laptop screen looked like a stranger, tired, hollow-eyed, and quietly raging. Mason was in the living room, building something out of Legos, humming softly to himself. When I looked at him, the rage twisted deeper. I thought about what it would mean to apologize. Would they treat him differently afterward? Would they see him as the kid whose mom backed down? Or worse, as the problem child whose mother had to be forced to behave? No. I couldn't do it. But at the same time, I was desperate. Mason missed school. He missed his friends. He didn't understand why adults, the people who were supposed to protect him, were punishing him for something so unfair. That night, after Mason went to bed, I sat by the window, the glow of the streetlight cutting across my face. I thought about my mom, about the years we'd spent struggling after my dad left, about the nights I'd worked double shifts, trying to keep the lights on. And then, I thought about the man who'd stepped into our lives when I was 16, my stepdad, Richard Hale. Richard was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he shifted the gravity of it. Everyone noticed him. He wasn't loud or flashy, he didn't need to be. His calm confidence was enough. He was a self-made billionaire, though you'd never hear him boast about it. My mom had met him while working as a travel consultant for one of his companies. At first, I'd been skeptical. I was a teenager with walls built high around me, and I thought he was just another man trying to play savior. But Richard never tried to buy my affection. He earned it quietly, through patience, kindness, and consistency. When Mom passed away 2 years ago, he stayed in my life like she had asked him to. He told me once, "You and Mason are my family now, Anna." That's not changing. I had never asked him for help with anything personal. Not once. I didn't want to be seen as taking advantage of him. But tonight, I felt small, cornered, and exhausted. I picked up my phone and hesitated for a long time before finally calling him. It was past 9 p.m., but he answered on the second ring, his voice steady and warm. "Anna? Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Not really," I said, my voice cracking despite my best effort. "It's about Mason School." I explained everything, the suspension, the bullying, the meeting with Miss Coleman, and finally, the email. I could hear him breathing steadily on the other end, not interrupting, just listening the way he always did. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, calm but with an edge I'd only heard in his boardroom tone, "They asked you to apologize for protecting your son?" "Yes," I whispered. "They said it's the only way he can come back." There was another pause, longer this time, and then he said, "You won't be apologizing to anyone. I'll handle it." "Richard." "No," he interrupted, firm but gentle. "They want to play power games? Fine. Let's show them what real power looks like, handled with grace." I knew that tone. It meant something was already in motion. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Richard's assistant. He'd arranged a meeting with the school board, set for that Friday at 9 a.m. "Mr. Hale will be accompanying you," the message read. When I dropped Mason off at my friend's house before the meeting, I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The drive to the school felt surreal. Richard's sleek black Bentley pulled up in front of my modest SUV, and when he stepped out, it was like time paused. He was in a navy suit, tailored perfectly, with that quiet composure that made everyone instinctively straighten up. His presence alone commanded respect, but it wasn't arrogance. It was control, restraint, confidence born from years of never needing to prove anything. As we walked toward the entrance, I noticed teachers and parents glancing our way, whispering, I suddenly realized how this must look. The single mom who had been dismissed and mocked now walking in beside one of the most powerful businessmen in the state. The principal's secretary looked stunned when she saw us. Miss Coleman will be right with you," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously between me and Richard. When Miss Coleman finally appeared, she put on her best polite smile. "Ms. Matthews, Mr. Hale, please come in." Her office felt smaller than I remembered. I could tell she was uncomfortable. She kept adjusting papers on her desk that didn't need adjusting. "Miss Coleman," Richard began, his tone measured, "I understand my grandson has been suspended over a matter that should have been handled quite differently." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I didn't realize." "No, you didn't," he said smoothly. "And that's precisely why we're here." He glanced at me, giving me a reassuring nod to continue. So I did. I told the story again. Calmly this time, without tears or shaking hands. I laid out every detail: the bullying, the dismissal, the meeting where I'd been disrespected, and the email demanding an apology. Richard didn't interrupt once, but I could see the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand rested lightly on the desk, a quiet signal of power restrained. When I finished, Miss Coleman tried to smile. "I'm sure this has all been a misunderstanding. Our policies are in place to ensure." "Your policy," Richard cut in, "should never be to intimidate parents into silence, especially those advocating for their child's safety." Her voice faltered. "Mr. Hale, we didn't intend." "I'm sure you didn't," he said coolly. "But intent doesn't erase impact. My grandson has been wrongfully suspended. My daughter was publicly humiliated. And now, you're asking for an apology?" Her composure cracked. She looked down at her desk, then back up at him. "What are you asking for, exactly?" Richard leaned forward slightly. "A written apology from this institution to my daughter. Immediate reinstatement for Mason. And a clear commitment to address bullying incidents fairly in the future." Ms. Coleman swallowed hard. "That's quite an ask." "It's the minimum," Richard replied. The room was silent for several seconds. You could almost hear the hum of the air conditioner. Finally, Miss Coleman said softly, "I'll need to speak to the board." "I'll wait," Richard said simply. And he did. She left the room, clearly flustered. When the door closed, I turned to him. "You didn't have to do this." He smiled faintly. "No, Anna. I did. Because people like her think they can push around anyone without power. But they forget, dignity isn't something you can take from someone. It's something you choose to keep." When Miss Coleman returned 20 minutes later, her expression was different, tight, resigned. "The board has agreed to your terms," she said quietly. "Mason's suspension is lifted effective immediately. A letter of apology will be issued by the end of the day." I stared at her, stunned. Richard stood, offering his hand. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Coleman. I hope this sets a new standard for how you treat parents moving forward." She shook his hand weakly. "Of course, Mr. Hale." When we walked out of that building, the sunlight hit my face like something holy. I felt taller, lighter, vindicated. Richard opened the car door for me and said quietly, "Next time, don't let anyone make you feel small for doing what's right." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you." He smiled. "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing. Never apologize for being strong." That night, when I picked up Mason, he threw his arms around me. "Mom, can I go back to school now?" I smiled, tears burning behind my eyes. "Yeah, baby, you're going back." They realized their mistake. He grinned, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like peace had returned to our home. But deep inside, I knew something else. This wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. No one would ever make me choose between my dignity and my child again. For a few days, everything felt like it was finally falling into place. Mason was back in school, smiling again, and I could breathe without that constant weight pressing on my chest. He came home excited, telling me about art class, recess, and how his friend Caleb had saved him a seat at lunch. I thought, maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was behind us. But peace, I've learned, has a cruel way of testing you right before it's stolen again. The first sign came the following week. Mason climbed into the car after school, quieter than usual. His face was pale, and his backpack hung loosely from his shoulder. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "How was your day?" He shrugged. "Okay." "Just okay?" He hesitated, looking out the window. Some of the kids were whispering about me, saying stuff. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of stuff?" He looked down, his small voice trembling. "They said I only got back because my grandpa's rich. That the teachers have to be nice to me now." It was like being punched in the gut. I'd expected awkwardness, maybe tension from the staff, but not this. Not kids weaponizing gossip. Gossip started by adults who should have known better. When we got home, Mason didn't even touch his dinner. He went straight to his room and shut the door. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the wall, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I knew exactly what had happened. Someone, maybe Miss Coleman herself, maybe one of her staff, had talked. They couldn't stand that I'd stood my ground, that I'd refused to bow. And now they were trying to make us pay in subtler ways. The next morning, I walked Mason into school personally. I could feel the shift in energy as we entered, the two bright smiles, the hushed tones. Ms. Coleman greeted me in the hallway, her expression tight but polite. "Good morning, Ms. Matthews," she said. "Mason seems to be settling back in well." I looked her dead in the eye. Except for the part where other students are bullying him because adults can't keep their mouths shut. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered. "I'm sure you're mistaken. Children can be imaginative." I took a step closer. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know where this came from. And if I hear one more word about it, from Mason or anyone else, I'll make sure this goes beyond a school board conversation." Her face drained of color. "Is that a threat, Ms. Matthews?" "No," I said evenly. "That's a promise." I turned and walked away before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but I kept my head high. Over the next few weeks, I tried to hold on to normalcy. Mason started seeing the school counselor twice a week, and Richard made sure the administration followed through on every reform they'd promised. Anti-bullying posters went up in hallways, teachers were retrained, and the school's social media was suddenly full of feel-good slogans about kindness and inclusion. But beneath it all, the hostility simmered. I could feel it every time I attended a parent meeting. Whispers behind my back, side glances. One mom even asked me, fake smile plastered on, "So, what's it like having a billionaire fix your problems?" I smiled back sweetly. "You should try standing up for your kids sometime. It's priceless." Still, it hurt. I was tired of being the villain in a story I didn't write. One Thursday afternoon, Mason came home with a note in his backpack. It was from the teacher, a disciplinary report. Apparently, Mason had raised his voice at another student. I sat him down. "What happened, honey?" His eyes filled with tears. "They called me a liar, Mom. Said you bought the principal." I told them to stop, but they kept laughing. I yelled at them, and now I'm in trouble. That was it. I was done. I grabbed my phone and called Richard. He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in the morning." The next day, he arrived at the school again, same suit, same calm authority. But this time, his patience had edges. We were ushered into the conference room. Ms. Coleman sat stiffly with two teachers and a man I hadn't met before, the superintendent, apparently. Richard took the lead, his voice low but firm. "I think it's time we talk about the culture you've allowed to fester here. My grandson is being bullied again by students, yes, but also indirectly by the adults who set this tone." Ms. Coleman tried to interject, but Richard continued smoothly. "You may not realize how information spreads, but gossip doesn't start in the playground. It starts in the break room." The superintendent cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, I assure you, this district takes such matters very seriously." "I'm sure you do," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "But seriousness without accountability means nothing." He turned to me, giving me a nod. "Anna, tell them what's been happening." I did. Every detail. The whispers, the cold treatment, the way Mason was made to feel like he didn't belong. By the time I was done, my voice was shaking, but I didn't care. The superintendent sighed, scribbling something in his notebook. "We'll conduct a review." Richard smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll do more than that. You'll issue a formal statement addressing the leak of confidential disciplinary information. You'll also fund an external investigation into your own handling of student conduct." The man blinked. "That's not typically how." "It is now," Richard said calmly. When the meeting ended, the superintendent looked like he'd aged 10 years. Ms. Coleman didn't meet my eyes. As we walked out, I whispered, You didn't have to go that far." Richard gave a soft laugh. "Anna, people like that only understand consequences. They can't see compassion unless it comes with power behind it." His words stuck with me all day. Because he was right, but it also made me wonder something deeper. Why did it take him being there for them to listen? Why did my voice alone never matter enough? That night, as I tucked Mason into bed, he looked up at me sleepily. "Mom, are you mad at the school?" I brushed his hair back gently.
"No, sweetheart."
"I'm just disappointed in how some people act." He nodded slowly. "Grandpa said people show who they are when they think no one's watching." I smiled. "He's a smart man." "Yeah," Mason murmured, already drifting off. "But you're brave, Mom." I sat there for a while listening to his breathing. And that's when it hit me. Maybe bravery isn't about never needing help. Maybe it's about standing your ground even when the world tries to crush you for it. 2 weeks later, the story broke online. Someone, probably from the district staff, had leaked an internal memo about Mason's case. It detailed everything: the wrongful suspension, the demand for my apology, the school's subsequent agreement after Richard's involvement. Within hours, it went viral. Local news stations picked it up. Comment sections exploded with outrage. A mother punished for defending her child? Privilege only matters when it challenges injustice. This school should be ashamed. I didn't know who leaked it, but I didn't care. For the first time, the truth was out there. Ms. Coleman resigned the following week. The superintendent issued a public apology. And the school district, the same one that had tried to silence me, announced a new parental rights and advocacy initiative, framing it as if it had been their idea all along. Richard called me that night. "You did this," he said simply. I laughed softly. "You mean we did?" "No," he said, his tone warm. "I just opened a door. You were the one who walked through it." As I sat on the porch that night, looking up at the stars, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the fragile kind that you tiptoe around, but the kind that roots itself deep, solid, and steady. Mason's laughter drifted from inside the house. He was okay. We were okay. And as for me, I wasn't just a mom who'd stood her ground. I was a woman who'd learned her worth and refused to apologize for it. It's strange how silence can feel like peace when you've lived through chaos. 3 months had passed since everything with the school came to light. Ms. Coleman was gone, the superintendent had been reassigned, and the district was still trying to patch up its reputation. But for me, life had finally settled into something that resembled calm, the kind I used to dream about during those sleepless nights when my mind was spinning with anger and guilt. Mason was thriving again. He woke up excited for school, humming as he got dressed, asking me to check his art projects, his spelling lists, his little science experiments. He'd started talking about his future again, about wanting to be an engineer like his grandpa, or maybe a teacher who actually listens. That one made me smile. But it also reminded me how deep those wounds had gone, how long it had taken both of us to start healing. Because even though things were fixed on paper, the apologies, the public statements, the reforms, I knew that real healing doesn't come from press releases. It comes quietly, slowly, in the way you learn to unclench your fists and exhale again. I remember sitting on the back porch one night after Mason had gone to bed. The air was cool and still, the kind of calm that feels earned. I was nursing a mug of chamomile tea when Richard joined me, his footsteps soft against the wooden planks. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, folding his hands in that patient way of his. After a while, he said, "You've done well, Anna." I laughed lightly. "I don't know about that. I'm just trying to breathe again." He looked at me for a long moment. "That's exactly what I mean." We sat in silence for a bit, listening to the crickets, the distant hum of a city. Then he said, "You know, when your mother was alive, she used to worry about you. Said you carried the world on your shoulders, but refused to ask for help." I smiled faintly. "Sounds like me." "She'd be proud," he said softly. The words hit deeper than I expected. I blinked quickly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I hope so." "She would be," he repeated, and I knew he meant it. That night, after Richard left, I stayed on the porch a little longer, staring up at the stars. I thought about Mom, about how she taught me to stand tall even when people tried to break me down. About how she used to say, "The world will always try to tell strong women to apologize for their strength. Don't ever listen." It had taken me years to really understand what she meant, but now I finally did. The next week, the school invited me to speak at a parent forum they were hosting, part of their new initiative on fairness and communication. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want to be the poster mom for their redemption arc. But then I thought about Mason, about how one small voice could ripple into something bigger if it just kept speaking. So I agreed. When the night came, I stood in front of about 50 parents in the school auditorium. The walls were lined with handmade posters from students about kindness and respect. I could see the principal's replacement, a younger woman named Ms. Ruiz, sitting in the front row, along with several teachers and board members. I took a deep breath and began. "When my son was suspended earlier this year," I said, my voice steady but soft, "I felt powerless. I felt unheard. I felt like the system that was supposed to protect him had already decided he wasn't worth protecting." I saw a few parents nodding. "I didn't come here tonight to reopen wounds or assign blame." I continued. "I came here because I want every parent to know that their voice matters, even when it shakes. Especially when it shakes." The room was quiet. You could feel the weight of it. "I learned something through all of this," I said, glancing down at the note cards in my hand, but not really needing them. Standing up for your child doesn't make you difficult. It doesn't make you dramatic. It makes you a parent who refuses to accept injustice as normal. I looked over at Ms. Ruiz, who smiled softly. "And maybe," I added, "it's time we stop teaching our kids to be silent to keep the peace, and start teaching them that peace built on silence isn't peace at all." When I finished, there was a pause, and then the applause started, slow and hesitant at first, but then louder, fuller, genuine. I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been bound tight for too long. After the event, a few parents came up to me. One woman hugged me, with tears in her eyes. "I wish I'd had the courage to do what you did when my son was bullied," she said. "You made me realize I still can." Her words stayed with me all the way home. That night, I tucked Mason into bed. He smiled sleepily. "Did everyone like your speech, Mom?" I brushed his hair back. "Yeah, I think they did." He grinned. "I knew they would. You're brave." I laughed softly. "I learned from the best." "Grandpa?" he asked. "No," I said, kissing his forehead. "From you." Because the truth was, Mason had been the reason I'd found my strength again. He was the reason I'd refused to back down. Every tear, every sleepless night, every hard conversation, it was all worth it because it showed him something I wanted him to carry forever, that you never have to apologize for doing the right thing. The following weekend, Richard invited us over for dinner. He'd been spending more time in town lately, and Mason loved helping him fix things in the garage. As they tinkered with an old radio that Saturday afternoon, I stood by the doorway, watching them. Mason's laughter filled the air, bright and unburdened. Richard looked up and smiled at me, the kind of smile that said everything words couldn't. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Later that evening, after dinner, Richard pulled out a small box and handed it to me. "Just a little something," he said. Inside was a simple gold pendant engraved with 2 words, "No apologies." I stared at it, my throat tightening. "It's perfect," I whispered. He nodded. "I thought so." I wore it every day after that. Not as a reminder of the pain, but of the strength that grew from it. Months passed. Life went on. Mason finished the school year strong, and by summer, we were planning our first real vacation in years, just the two of us and maybe Richard joining for a few days. Sometimes I'd still get stares at the grocery store or whispers at parent events, but they didn't sting anymore. Because I'd learned something vital. The people who resent your strength are usually the ones who've never found their own. And if there's one thing I'd want anyone listening to my story to remember, it's this: power isn't money or status or who you know. Power is knowing your worth when others try to diminish it. It's standing up even when your voice shakes. It's walking into a room where they expect you to apologize and smiling instead.
So, yes.
My child was banned from school until I apologized. But I didn't. I brought my billionaire stepdad instead. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, I found something I never knew I'd lost: myself. Because the truth is, the apology they wanted wasn't about words. It was about submission. It was about making me small. But I've learned something they'll never teach in any classroom. You can rebuild anything: reputation, peace, confidence. But once you trade your dignity, you can't buy it back. So I'll keep my dignity. I'll keep my son's pride. And I'll keep living without apologies. As the summer wind carried through the open window that night, I sat beside Mason as he slept, that gold pendant resting against my heart, and whispered the words my mother once told me. Words I finally understood. Never let anyone decide how small you should be. Because sometimes, standing tall is the greatest revenge of all.